It is my pleasure to welcome Kit Welchlin.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for that flattering introduction. My goodness, after an introduction like that, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. And thank you for sharing that just the way I wrote it. I always appreciate that. Great to be here with you. A couple of things I'd like to clarify as we get started. Jennifer mentioned that I began public speaking at the age of 9. That was not out of desire. That was out of necessity. You see, when I grew up on that hog and dairy farm in southern Minnesota, I was the youngest of 4 sons, no sisters. And I grew up in a position-centered family, not a person-centered family where everyone would have an equal say or an equal vote. No, there was a true hierarchy in the family where my dad had the most authority, then my mom, and then it went from oldest to youngest, and I was the youngest. So what would happen around the dining room table is my dad would say something, then my mom would say something, then Cabot, Kelly, Corey, and then they changed the subject. And I always had a terrible time getting into the conversation. But in 4-H, I could get up in front of a club once a month and give a 5 or 10 minute speech without interruption, and, well, I really haven't stopped since. Then I went to school at Mankato State, became a college dropout. I left college after my junior year when that little manufacturing company came up for sale in my hometown. And the reason the business was for sale is because the gentleman that had started the company in 1972 had already suffered a massive heart attack by 1983, so it looked like something I should get involved with. And it was a stressful business. The presentation I deliver the most often is called STP, Stress, Time, and Procrastination Management. Coincidentally, the presentation I deliver second most often is handling difficult people dealing with people you can't stand. So I don't know if there's a correlation there or not. But anyhow, things turned out just fine. So I was 21 when I bought my first manufacturing company. I was the youngest employee. I had no technical expertise. I was the chief executive officer and $450,000 in debt. Yay! That was a lot of money back in '83. Still a lot of money today, but I had a business mentor back then that told me, kid, if you owe the bank $50,000, you're in trouble. If you owe the bank $500,000, they're in trouble. Be careful when you pick your mentors. But one of the things I kept studying and didn't realize I was studying was this concept of emotional intelligence. And it's a combination of skills, and it is something that we can learn. It isn't something that we're necessarily born with. So I'm going to share with you some strategies and techniques to really apply emotional intelligence for career success. I never really expected to speak on this topic, but I was giving presentations down at IBM in Rochester, and the HR person came up to me and says, you know, we had someone here last week that talked about emotional intelligence. It was interesting, but we didn't know how to apply it. Could you put together a seminar on how to apply emotional intelligence for career success? So that is what the name of my presentation is. And I said, well, it usually takes about 6 months to do something like that. And she says, well, this is April. What's your dates in October? So I started speaking on emotional intelligence, and it was really quite a popular topic before COVID, and then it just all switched to helping people go through change and manage the stress caused by change. And it's nice to be back. I've delivered probably 130 or so virtual presentations in the last 15 months. It's different than being together, and I really enjoy being here with you. And actually, I was a Rotary member back in the 80s for 6 years in St. James. And whenever I'm asked to speak at a Rotary Club, I always say yes. And today, what I'm also going to provide you is, there's 38 books in the back of the room, my Communication Kit Volume 2, that I'm donating to the chapter, or to the club. And I'd like you to buy them for $10 a piece, and all proceeds go to your Rotary Club. So if you buy that entire box of books, that's fantastic. Your club will have another $380 to put toward your good causes, so please support that. Oh, thank you. So let's take a look at this concept of emotional intelligence. There's 5 components to emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skill, which is kind of a combination of the previous 4. Now, people who lack strong relationships have 2 to 3 times the risk of early death, regardless of whether they smoke, drink alcohol, or exercise regularly, according to the research by Dr. Ronald Adler. And we spend more time with the people we work with than the people we live with, and we claim we love them. So these are important relationships. Now, please don't misinterpret that statistic. That doesn't mean you can lay on the sofa drinking booze, smoking cigarettes, eating junk food, live a long, happy life as long as you get along with your coworkers. That'll help, but it's not going to make all the difference. And it's kind of what we say and how we say it when it comes to emotional intelligence. Saying to someone, have a nice day, sounds friendly. But saying enjoy your next 24 hours sounds kind of threatening. I don't know, it just doesn't sound quite as friendly. And it's not just the content, it's also the context, the kind of the situation that we find ourselves in. I was trying to buy some organic fruit and for my wife, and I asked the guy in the produce if their apples had been sprayed with any poisonous chemicals because they were for my wife. And well, I should be done with the police interview soon. Emotional intelligence is also being clear and concise in your messages. That's pretty important. So we're going to talk about these one at a time for a couple of minutes, and you have a handout at your table if you'd like to keep and use it, which is kind of the highlights of how we apply this if I give a speech or seminar on this topic that's longer than 20 minutes. So when it comes to self-awareness, this is how well we know ourselves, our strengths and our weaknesses, and how accurate is that? How supported is that, or how distorted is that? So when it comes to the image of who you are, it comes down to your feelings and thoughts about your strengths, your weaknesses, abilities, your limitations, what you believe to be true about yourself. We believe it's our own impression, our own opinion about who we are. However, it isn't necessarily. There's this thing called a reflected self-appraisal, that we get an idea of who we are based upon how people respond to us. And so if we act a certain way, that might be recognized in a positive way. We act a certain way, we might be recognized in a negative way. So over time, it's kind of, who you spend time with has quite an impact on who you believe you are. So there's really 6 perceptions that go on in a relationship between us and another person. Like today, who I think I am, who I believe you think I am, and then really who you think I am. And then from your side of the relationship, who you think you are, who you believe I think you are, and really who I think you are. There's 60 of us in the room. That's 360 perceptions going on all at the same time. Trying to figure out, you're going to buy into this, going to make that adjustment. A lot of smoke and mirrors when it comes to perception. But that's what gives us the chance to create a culture, climate where we work, or recreate it just in how we interact with each other. And it's fast. It's fast. There's a great little book called Secrets of Successful Speakers that claims half the impact on how you perceive me in the entire 20 minutes or so, or 25 minutes we spend together, occurred in the first 5 minutes, like quick drying cement. Half the impact on how you perceive me occurred in the first 5 minutes. So how did you perceive me? Jacket unbuttoned and responding to the introduction from Jennifer, saying thank you for that flattering introduction. Can't wait to hear what I have to say. How did you perceive me in the first 5 minutes? This is where we have the lively interaction between the speaker and the audience. How'd you perceive me?
Real or real?
Real, okay, authentic, real, yeah, genuine, okay. Upbeat. Friendly, well, we can keep going with these. Let's say instead I started with my jacket button and I said, good afternoon, my name is Kit Welchlin. Today I'll be sharing with you some strategies and techniques that will work if you put them to work. Now how do you perceive me? Serious. What? Formal, yeah. Maybe even opinionated. If you want any opinions, I'll tell you mine. I love saying that. It's kind of naughty, but I love saying that. So I think, well, that jacket's kind of formal, looks kind of sloppy unbuttoned, and it's kind of warm outside. Not quite sure how cold it's going to be in here. So I think maybe what I'll do instead, I think I will. I'll just go ahead and start the presentation instead by putting on this sweater. So instead I start by saying,
Mr. Rogers.
You put it on yet? Yeah, I remind you of Mr. Rogers. That's going to be some real hard-hitting information, isn't it? I mean, you'll be afraid I'm going to move into your neighborhood. Actually, I used to live in the neighborhood. Used to live on Aspen Road, and I had a house one time on Southdale Road. It's nice to be back. I don't want to be perceived as Mr. Rogers. And this is how fast it is. It may take as little as 100 milliseconds, a tenth of a second, to form an impression of another person to decide whether or not he or she is attractive, trustworthy, competent, and likable. A tenth of a second. It takes 2/10 of a second time to change a facial expression. We're late. According to Princeton University, that's less time than it takes to form a rational thought. I always tell my good friends in city and county government, they're held to an unfair standard. Everybody watches them when they leave their house, and neighbors take a look at their watch. They can't be downtown in 5 minutes because we're paying their salaries. When I work with county highway departments, they see a car coming, they just grab a shovel and start moving some gravel around because everybody's got a smartphone to take a picture of them leaning on a shovel because we've never leaned on a shovel, right? And in a funny sort of way, in every relationship we have personally and professionally, it's opening night every day, a tenth of a second at a time. So we want to make sure we're prepared for that. So where does this all come from? Well, it comes from our experiences growing up. I grew up on a hog and dairy farm, and if you know things about dairy farms, you milk cows in the morning, you milk cows in the afternoon. We had 100 sows, 1,000 pigs. We were either grinding feed or hauling manure. It's kind of a vicious cycle on a hog and dairy farm. And so I don't mind working 7 days a week. I love what I do for my career. My wife's a couple of years younger than me. She's a Generation Xer, and she believes we should have some balance in our lives. So since 1988, I felt like I have one foot on the accelerator pedal and one foot on the brake. But I do know that balance is important, and I do know that it isn't just all work, even if you do enjoy it. So our experiences growing up have quite a bit of impact. And then, of course, our personal attributes, kind of our God-given talents. It was just so easy for us to do. And then when it comes to our social roles, there's probably 40 or 50 of them, if you were to list those, that you live up to, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, an employee, a mentor, a mentee, or however you're going through your life. And others' images of you, and the more significant they are, the more impact they have. I remember when I informed my father that I was going to go into the speaking business and leave the 3 manufacturing companies, he said I was throwing my life away. And we had kind of a lively conversation about it, and I didn't see or talk to him for a couple of years, and then I had to figure out a way to repair that relationship, and it took a couple of years. So sometimes when we destroy a relationship, it takes some time to restore that relationship, but we can do it if you're patient. And then we have social comparison. Who are you comparing yourself to anyway? And if you had the same talent, would you have used it that way anyhow? So that's kind of a dangerous circle, and your own interpretations and evaluations is what we hope, and your own kind of personal goals or expectations is what we really would like to see happen. So sometimes we'll take a personality indicator and it'll give us our top 5 traits or something, but whenever I give a presentation on this topic, you have a handout on your page. There's 144 words on this list called personal traits, and I have people in my seminar circle every one of these words that you believe you do possess, and often they'll circle almost half of them. And sometimes we just keep narrowing people into what their skill set is when they're much more capable, much more talented than we've ever given them credit. And once they see it on paper that there's dozens of personal traits that are positive that they possess, it gives them a better global understanding of who they are and the impact that they can have. And I often refer to this as their personal brand. And the foundation of a personal brand is your background, your experience, what you can take a test and prove. And because you know that, understand that, can do that, how does your department benefit? How does your organization benefit? And then how do people feel after they've interacted with you? It's one thing to leave a good first impression, but we have just as many opportunities to leave lasting positive impressions. Are people excited to read your email? Are they excited to take your phone call? Are they excited to see your text message or not? And then what are your values and your principles and ethics in which you make your decision? And what's your personality like day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year? And have we thought about that lately? So we have a little work we can do, and I want to talk about how do we enhance that personal brand. Well, I have this little list here called the 6 Criteria of Personal Credibility. It comes out of the second best book, not my book, second best book I ever read, called Reaching Out, Interpersonal Effectiveness and Self-Actualization. And it says we have to be consistently warm and friendly. And then we express our intentions and motives so there's no suspicion. Then you follow through, be trustworthy. Be an information source, knowable information, what's pen, pasted, posted on the wall, guidebook, handbooks. What qualified you for the job in the first place? And you have relevant expertise. When people have a question about that, they seek you out for the answers rather than wasting their time talking to anyone else. And then you're dynamic. It's not that you're doing calisthenics and jumping jacks in between phone calls or meetings, but when you walk in a room, the lights get a little bit brighter rather than a little bit dimmer. When you come to work, people are happy to see you rather than resenting the fact you showed up again today. And they're all free. It's all free, but it's all how people perceive us. So we want to make sure we manage that. So let's take a look. How do we manage that? Well, through self-regulation. And self-regulation is we all have bad days. We all get in a bad mood. We all feel not physically well some days. But we've got to figure out how do we get back on track? How do we get our head back on straight? And when people do disappoint us, when people do let us down, how do we make sure we don't drag that into other relationships that are innocent? Because if we do, we'll destroy trust. And trust is the foundation of almost every relationship if we want it to be productive. So let's take a look at this. When it comes to self-regulation, I guess I paraphrase this as our ability to bite our tongue. We think at 800 to 1,200 words per minute. I don't know if you're like me, but so little bit of that do I share with other people. It's crazy in here, and we are very careful, aren't we, in how much we share and when we say those sort of things. So we want to be able to monitor our self-talk, think about the relationship, think about the impact we're going to have in that conversation. So there's 4 key aspects to trustworthiness, and that's expressing acceptance. You may not agree, but you accept that they have that point of view and perception. Also, supportiveness, not financially necessarily, but emotionally, that you believe in them. They have personal traits or job-related skills that provide talent and value. And then also you express cooperative intentions, and sometimes we call this the language of responsibility. Sometimes the smallest word, I, we, me, us, our, has the greatest impact in the sentence. Are we sharing that responsibility? Are we willing to work cooperatively? And then, of course, reciprocating disclosures appropriately, which is simply empathy. I can understand how disappointing that would be. I can understand how excited you are about that. So we can blend with the emotion so people feel normal, and then they'll listen to logic. If you deny people that emotion, they aren't going to listen to the logic. So we need to blend with the emotion, whatever that may be for them. And then they'll listen to logic because they feel normal. So how do we do this? Well, sometimes we don't get much notice, so we really have to understand our emotions so we can respond appropriately. And this is kind of like a funnel. All information simply comes through our senses. This is just raw data. No meaning's been applied to it. It's what people say, it's what people do. The second step is interpretation, which is the intellectual question, why? Why would a person say this? Why would a person do this? Now, based upon that interpretation, we'll have a feeling. And once we're trapped in that emotional state, it limits our options of what we would say or what we would do when we feel like that. But we still need to express, and hopefully it's our best option. Now, I always believe on this one, we should practice at home and then bring it to work. I have a little story here. A couple drove down a country road for several miles, not saying a word. An earlier discussion led to an argument. Neither of them wanted to concede their position. I've been in that car before. Now, if they would have understood their emotions and responded appropriately, they could have restarted or finished this conversation better than this. Unfortunately, as they passed a barnyard of mules, goats, and pigs, the husband asked sarcastically, "Relatives of yours?" "Yep," replied the wife, "in-laws." Okay, well, I don't think that got any better. I don't know why, but I just don't think so. So when we have a little bit more time together, we talk about what about if somebody you work with says, "I feel angry, frustrated, or negative when," and can we figure out what are those circumstances? What creates that kind of a feeling, that what let them down? And if we can, usually figure out how do we express that. And there's a better way that we can manage that emotion so it doesn't spill over into other relationships that are innocent. I always like these neutral phrases. That's an idea. That's interesting. You've got a point. I'll need some time to think about that. I'll give that some thought. On the phone, we want to have those listening noises like "I see, I understand, go on." If they say, "Are you still there?" we're not holding up our end of the relationship. And then, of course, take notes and provide feedback. And I love taking notes in conversations because then I'm in control of the conversation rather than being a victim of it. And it slows things down. It limits the exaggerations. It limits the profanity. It limits the flat-out lying because there's going to be a written record. I'm going to provide feedback and verify that's just the way you said it. And it's amazing how it changes the tone of the conversation. Well, about 15% of my work isn't like this, where it's fun. It's where I get a call from clients that say, "I have a department, everybody in that department hates each other. Wonder if you could come in and help us fix that." Oh, that'd be fantastic. Thanks for thinking of me. Can't wait to get there. All that cussing, swearing, finger pointing, crying, blaming. Oh, when can we start? Right? Yeah, so I always take notes so I can provide feedback and verify. And then motivation, what motivates us. And it's different for every person. So what I always do is, in your handout, you'll see, kind of the historical ideas about motivation. And I ask people, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which one is it for you? Well, I'll tell you what. Since 1983, I've always been self-employed. So when it comes to me, you know what it is? Physical needs. It's the first one. I got to make sure I make some money just so I can keep a roof over my head. One of my mentors, Tom Wininger, always said, make sure your house payment is no bigger than your speaking fee because you only have to book one speech and you'll be able to keep your house. Never forgot that. And then when it comes to President Herzberg, the extrinsic, intrinsic rewards, I ask people to circle the two extrinsic conditions that motivate them. But guess what? There's 5 other ones on that list that motivate other people. When it comes to intrinsic rewards, identify the 2 that motivate you. Well, there's 4 more that motivate other people. But sometimes we have to see it on paper before we can recognize our own motivational intentions and to recognize it in others when it presents itself. And then, of course, McClellan says, we want achievement. We want affiliation to be part of something larger than ourselves, like Rotary. And then, of course, power. Now, when it comes to power and communication or emotional intelligence, it's just influence, impact. When you say something, people stop to consider it instead of just simply ignoring it. And then empathy. This is always a big one. I think this about empathy. I think empathy is probably one of the hardest soft skills that we could ever develop.
Sorry, Ken.
That's all right, Sam. Nice seeing you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by. What was going on with the mic?
Is it working?
I don't know. Is it working now? Yeah. Was I loud enough before?
Yes.
I think so.
It just went out.
Oh, it just went out?
Start
Okay.
over. We didn't hear
I must have been in a certain train of thought. I better be careful when I drive home. So when it comes to empathy, what is that? Well, it's understanding other people's needs. Several universities have a cry closet. Have you heard about this? It's a closet where students can go and cry when they feel stressed. Because there's nothing more comforting than being trapped in a tiny dark room, right? I don't understand that. I think they're missing the point, I think. Then the University of Utah installed a cry closet for students who are stressed. Do you know what would stress me? Being seen coming out of that closet. That's what I think would bother me. Anyway. So what empathy really is being a good listener and really listening to that person, to the facts and the feelings. So we got to get prepared physically and psychologically. What am I dealing with? What's the context? What's the situation I'm facing? And then you want to make sure you stay involved by asking questions. The best questions to ask are what questions and how questions, because there are no wrong answers to what or how questions. And the more they talk, the better they feel. And if you listen first, you have more credibility when you respond, because people believe you're taking their perspective in mind, even if you're not. So they always go first. So we ask what and how questions. And then we make sure we keep an open mind. They might tell us something we'd never considered. And we usually say, if I share with you what I really truly think and feel, and you share with me what you really truly think and feel, we kind of create a third reservoir of knowledge that neither one of us alone would have ever created. So we want to make sure that people feel that comfortable to tell us what they think and how they feel and be that vulnerable. And then we need to review and evaluate the content of the conversation, but also how good were we as a listener. So, reviewing and evaluating our performance is pretty important. Take a look at this story. An older gentleman went to the doctor complaining that his wife could barely hear. The doctor suggested a test to find out the extent of the problem. Stand far behind her and ask her a question, and then slowly move up and see how far away you are when she first responds. Well, he's pretty excited about that, to finally be working on the solution for the problem. Runs home and sees his wife preparing supper. Honey, the man asked, standing 20 feet away, what's for supper? No response. He tried it again at about 15 feet away. Honey, what's for supper? No response. Then again, 10 feet away. Honey, what's for supper? No response. Finally, he was 5 feet away and said, honey, what's for supper? She replies, for the 4th time, it's lasagna. Probably needs to review and evaluate his performance as a listener. So one of the things that I suggest to demonstrate empathy is perception checking. So you have this page in your handout. I love perception checking. When somebody says something and you're not quite sure what they're thinking or what they're feeling, you describe the behavior, or you restate what they said, or you describe, what you believe they're saying, and then you offer 2 possible interpretations. Is it because of this, or is it because of this? And then what is it? And so if we were in a seminar together, if one of your coworkers said, I hate all these changes, can't we go back to the old way? We would say, now when you say you don't really enjoy these changes, is that because you think it doesn't really apply to the job, or the training isn't adequate for you to be successful, or what's going on? So we just expand the conversation. We want them to continue. The more people talk, the better they feel. Talking soothes emotions, not talking stirs trouble. So we go through some examples of how we can respond by making sure that we perception check. And then the last thing is a combination of all of these is what we call social skill, the ability to maintain long-term relationships. And it's really based upon the 4 previous concepts. And sometimes people try to force it. I went into a coffee shop that didn't have Wi-Fi because they wanted people to actually talk to one another. The only thing we talked about is that we wish we had Wi-Fi. You really can't force this on people. It should be something that comes across somewhat naturally. Now, there's a new report that claims that millennials and Gen Zs have poor conversation skills. Well, I don't know. When asked for a comment, they texted a series of crying and frowning emoji faces. So I'm not sure if those are... Might take that slide out of my presentation, I guess. What we're trying to do is, with social skill, is to create a communication climate. Just like the weather outside right now, it's kind of warm, sunny. It's a little warmer than maybe we'd prefer, but it's nice. It's nice to be warm. I always remember how when I was really cold, how I always wish it would be warm again. So I always appreciate it being warm. But you might have some relationships, like the weather will be in 6 months where it's cold and windy or cold, or hopefully it'll rain and break the heat, and that's going to be kind of gloomy and cloudy. But the nice thing about social skill is this: when you come to work or are part of a meeting, when you walk in, you can set the thermostat that every time you enter the room, it becomes warm and friendly, it becomes warm and comfortable, and people are comfortable to tell you what they think and how they feel and work together cooperatively to solve problems. But you always have 2 options. You can either create a defensive communication climate or a supportive communication climate. So on the left side, these are the things that we do that create a supportive climate. The ones on the right side are the things, our other choice, that create a defensive communication climate. So description versus evaluation. So description, you say, I noticed you came to the meeting 10 minutes late. You're not judging or evaluating. Instead of saying, I can't believe how rude and inconsiderate you are coming to the meeting late. Yeah, that just doesn't sound quite as supportive. I don't know why. And then when it comes to equality and superiority, Equality is, I'd like to hear how the issue looks to you, then I'll tell you how it looks to me. That's pretty equal. Versus superiority, when you get in my position someday, then you'll understand. Yeah, for some reason, that just doesn't sound quite as cooperative. Problem orientation versus control. Problem orientation, the production in your department hasn't been as high as I hoped. Any ideas of what we could do? Oh, that's very focused on production versus either you start working harder or you're fired. Yeah, that just doesn't quite sound quite as supportive for some reason. Spontaneity, open, honest versus strategy, kind of manipulative. I'm concerned about your job performance. Let's set up some time and talk about it. Versus strategy, have you considered another line of work? Wait a minute, I'm not sure what that meant. And then empathy versus neutrality. I bet you're pretty excited about the promotion. Excited promotion, good match. Versus neutrality, don't get too excited. Everybody gets promoted sooner or later. Take the fun out of it. I don't know. This didn't seem to matter. Provisionalism would be open-mindedness versus certainty. I'm not sure if that presentation on emotional intelligence was a very good use of my time. What did you think? Hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? I hated that presentation. Say, I think, Don, somebody got my slides. I don't know how that got in there. But this is what I'd like you to consider. In the morning, in 1 minute, I can change my attitude. In that minute, change my entire day. And if I was an actor, I get paid to play a role. Guess what? At work, you get paid to play a role. You know all the characters, giving you some of your lines, some of your stage directions. Now all you need to do is play your part. If you ever have any questions or want additional information, you can always track me down. I have 2 different emails, kit@welchlin.com or kit@seminarsonstress.com. You can visit my 2 YouTube channels. There's about 250 YouTube videos on my Kit Welchlin YouTube channel. There's about 60 videos on stress management on the Seminars on Stress YouTube channel. And then those 2 websites always have new information if you'd like to acquire that. And then the last thing I want to do is remind you that when you buy these books, all the money goes to the club. And I put $10 bills back there to make change because I have a hunch none of you carry anything smaller than a 20. Thank you.